You're listening to Beyond Technique, the podcast that empowers photographers to bring their businesses to the next level. Hello and welcome to Beyond Technique, brought to you by Platypod, Photofocus, and Cohen University. This is Shamir Young, and I'm joined by my co-host and man of many creative talents, Skip Cohen.
Wow, man of many creative talents.
You make a mean pizza
I'm
on
running
the grill.
out. I have to tell you, like everybody in the pandemic, you get to a point where you feel like you're running out of creative talents. It's like, okay, how can we make today different than yesterday was?
Hey, you seem to have
tough.
plenty. Yeah.
Hey, Shamira.
Hey, Skip.
I'm laughing because I love these Hey, Shamira moments. Let's talk about a unique product at Platypod, which is the Platypod newsletter. And I know there's one coming out on February 25th, which is just a week away. You're the editor and publisher of that newsletter. And I got to tell you, it just, with each issue, it looks better and better. What do you got coming up next with this next one?
You know, what I love about the newsletter is that it has so many cool ideas and inspiration for photographers. And so we have some amazing work from some of our talented photographers who are using Platypod. We've got, let me think, we're featuring some macro photography, some infrared photography, some, I guess you could call it product photography, artistic product photography, just to kind of drop a few hints there on what's coming up. And in every newsletter, we feature the photographer's setup, specifically of how they're using their Platypod. And it's just really cool. It's really inspirational. I think we all need a bit of creativity and inspiration in our lives with everything going on. And we also include any current specials that Platypod is running as well. So if you don't want to miss the specials that are going on, make sure and sign up for the newsletter, which, by the way, you can do if you go to platypod.com, and there will be a pop-up /bar across the top of the page where you can sign up nice and easy. Then you'll never miss out on anything.
And not only is it free, but as you develop your own skill set with Platypod, if you'll keep Shamira in the loop, send us images. We're always looking for images to share on the blog, on Instagram.
Yes.
We always give credit to the photographer, the artist that's created the image. And we need a great image on the front end and then a behind-the-scenes shot that you could just grab with your phone, showing what your setup is. And ideally, if you can have whatever your subject is in the viewfinder, it makes that BTS shot even stronger and easier for other artists to understand so that we can keep helping you build on creativity. It's just great stuff. And Shamir and I are having an absolute blast working with the Platypod team.
For sure, for sure. And real quick, if you do want to send me anything directly, you can send it to my email, shamira@platypod.com. That's my first name, CHAMIRA @platypod.com. Really, all of my emails, it all goes to the same inbox. So send me what you got. I'd love to see it. We'd love to feature it.
Hey, we have a great episode of Beyond Technique today. Bryan Caporicci is in the house, and it is a kick to catch up to him. Now, here's the backstory. It's probably 7 or 8 years ago I got a call from Bryan, who just wanted to meet. No agenda. He was going to be in Florida and just wanted time to talk about an industry we both obviously love so dearly. So a month or two later, when he was down here, we caught up for lunch, and that launched a great friendship. Bryan is the founder of SproutStudio, and for several years, in fact, I did a podcast on what today is GetSproutStudio.com. Now, here are the hats he wears. He's an educator. He's a writer. He's a podcaster. He's a business innovator. He's a great manager. Somewhere in there, he's a working wedding photographer. He's a super dad. He also happens to be the only Canadian I've ever met who rarely says, eh? So I had to throw that in there. He's also been working hard with the SproutStudio team, and they've been working hard to develop content to help artists stay on track and build their business during the pandemic. I know that's going to be a big part of what we're going to talk about today, and especially important to remind everybody, hunkering down is about your health. It's not about your business. So, Bryan, this is going to be the cue for your lips to move. Welcome to Beyond Technique.
Thank you guys for having me. This is a ton of fun. I'd say that it's neat to be on the other side of the microphone, but I'm still on this side of the microphone. I'm just on the other side of the interview, I guess.
And you haven't used A yet. So that's what I'm.
Oh, you wait. We make a drinking game out of it.
That's true. With the pandemic, you have been home and around all those fellow Canadians much more than in past years.
That's right.
Oh, that's hilarious, Bryan. We were so thrilled to have you on the show. And I mean, Skip and I have known you for years. This is really going to be a kick. This is going to be so cool. And I'm so curious to hear how you were doing and your business and your family during the pandemic especially. But just to kick it off, for those who may not know who you are or much about you, tell us about your background. How did you get started, and how did you end up doing what you're doing today?
The funny story that I don't tell enough, but it's interesting. I was in university for computer science, and of course, being in computer science, I was the guy that everyone went to for computer anything, right? It's like, oh, you're in computer science, you must know how to do anything with computers. So I got a summer job in my first year of university working for another photographer. Now, he did sports photography, so he did gymnastics events where we would go to events, and he would send out a crew of photographers onto the floor, and then they would all bring back their cards from their cameras to me at the computer. And then we would offload them, and we would display and sell them to parents as they came back after their child was on the floor for gymnastics. So that was my first introduction to photography. I don't have this long history in photography as a kid and things like that. My dad's been a photographer. For me, I just got into it because of computers. And long story short, I had this entrepreneurial knack and ended up starting a business with the owner of that company called Memories in Motion. And after him and I decided to go different ways, I was like, well, I'm going to keep doing this. And what we were doing, it's funny to think of it now, but we called it digital memory preservation, which is like a really fancy way to say we did slideshows. But like this was early days of digital. This is like 2005, where that kind of presentation of photography was unique and different and new. So I basically had this business that I was now going to run by myself called Memories in Motion, and I knew nothing about photography because he did all the photography and I did all the technology side of things. So I, walked my way into Henry's, a local camera store here, and I said, hey, I own a photography business. What camera should I buy? And that was like the start of my career as a photographer. I mean, that was, 15 years ago. But the interesting thing about that story, and the reason I like to tell it, is because I got into photography as an entrepreneur first, as a business person first, and then I learned, and obviously now I love photography. But most photographers are the opposite, right? They get into photography because they love photography. They love the creative side of what they do. And then they realize that they have to run a business. And so I think for me, in the last 15 years of being a full-time professional photographer, having that business edge, having that insight of, marketing and selling and pricing, and that passion to pursue those topics and to hone my skills in those areas has given me, the successes as I've defined them in my career to where I am today, where I can now teach photographers and run SproutStudio, which helps photographers again on the business side of what they do. So that's kind of like the long and short of it.
Boy, when you look back, there's so much there. And I remember, it's hard for me to believe that it's been, 7 or 8 years since you and I first met, because the industry has changed so much, and then the pandemic rolled in. But that whole entrepreneurial spirit that you have, that I have, that a lot of our mutual friends have, Shamara has, it's all a foundation that is so important to keep your business going. And I'd love to jump right into the topic. I don't want to make this one of those what should you do during a pandemic kind of podcasts, because there have been so many of them. But you've really shared a lot of great information on SproutStudio and in content on the blog of things people should be doing to stay in touch with their clients, and the importance of that relationship building to continue. Let's go in there and jump in on any aspect of that you want to. Yeah,
I love it. I think we spent a lot of time early days of the pandemic. I started going live in our Facebook community back like mid-March of last year, every day, just to basically, discuss and share how do we continue to keep our businesses afloat. And it's so interesting to think back now, because we did that, and then we ran a course, which is still available for free if anyone wants to take it. And we put together all kinds of resources that we called our first aid resources, all these tools and ideas and strategies to help photographers pivot their business. And I hate the word pivot because it's so overused, but like, it's so important, because I believe so strongly that the pandemic underscored the things that were important before the pandemic, but were perhaps easy to brush aside. But now the pandemic has made those things a necessity in order to succeed in business. And it really just, in my opinion, fast-tracked the industry 10 years ahead to where we were going anyways, but it just made it happen faster. And so I think some of the things that we talked about and that we learned and that we implemented in our business during the pandemic, and for some of us, we're kind of still very much going through that pandemic, those strategies and those tactics and the mindset that we had to have during those times, we need to be adapting that as just a new part of our norm. Like, that now has become and is becoming the status quo for how photographers succeed today and in this post-pandemic world. And so, Skip, you talked about relationships. That is such a big part of it. And I've got 6 points here that we kind of used as like pillars for this first aid series. I'll run through 6 of them, and I'm happy to dive into any of them, or we can go in a different direction if you guys would prefer. Number 1 is to harden your systems. Number 2 is, Skip, what you said, focus on relationships and build empathy. Number 3 is differentiate. Number 4 is to guide and serve others always. Number 5 is to get organized. And number 6 is to diversify your revenue streams. I think the last one's probably, honestly, one of the more important ones. But those are the 6 things that a photographer should be really thinking about in order to, A, continue to succeed and sustain their business through these trying times. But also, those are 6 core principles that they need to be thinking about, again, making a part of their everyday, making a part of their status quo beyond the pandemic in order to continue to succeed in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is what you were referencing, but in that very first one you said, was it harden your systems?
Yes.
All right. When I think of harden your systems, to me, right now, there are more people involved in social media than at any time in certainly in history, period. It's the one way that we all communicate. It's the one way we all share images, concepts, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn even. It's anything out there. But more than ever, to me, your website and having your website functioning right and your blog are important. Agree, disagree?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think just the idea of, business structure, workflow structure, having good systems in your business, both from, like you said, Skip, the social side and the website side and all of that, but then also just like in your client workflow and in your own creative workflow and your own processes internally, the way that you structure your business, I think now it's more important than ever to be really making sure that you've got good systems running in your business, because everything else, which is, focusing on relationships and diversifying revenue stream and all this chaos that 2020 and 2021 are throwing at us, it's more important now than ever to actually have systems and workflows and repeatable processes that you can follow to keep yourself organized and your clients organized.
I'm really curious about point number 6. I think you said it was diversifying your revenue streams, because I know a lot of photographers are struggling. And even given your own personal experience as a family and wedding photographer, do you have any tips for any photographers listening who need to start looking into other revenue streams just to stay afloat?
I think 2020 really made the point to us as an industry that if you're focusing on just one thing as a photographer, you're going to have a really hard time to continue to make a full-time living at it. And it's interesting because that's a concept I've fully believed in for a long, long time, that I think as photographers, we need to be focusing on being good photographers and not just like hyper niching in one very, very specific area. That's not to say that you can't have a unique approach or a unique style or a unique vision to how you create and how you connect as a photographer. But I think that for those photographers that would like, I only photograph, couples who are getting married in this area, who are this kind of personality and only like these kinds of things and only eat at these stores or these restaurants. I think for those photographers that hyper niche like that, those are the photographers that are now finding themselves out of work, because getting that specialized in who your client is means that as soon as something, takes the rug from underneath that clientele, that whole business model falls down. And so I think, again, like it's always been, in my opinion, a good business practice for most of us. And I say that for most of us because there are photographers who have succeeded in hyper specializing. But I think that the vast majority of photographers need to be thinking more about, how do I just be a good photographer and how do I service my clients, especially if you're, in the wedding and portrait space? How do I serve them throughout their entire life cycle? They're in like all the different seasons that they'll go through as clients in the next 15, 20, 30 years, as they get married, as they have kids, as their kids grow up, as their kids get into other areas, getting into senior portraits, and then, photographing their kids' weddings. I mean, like, how amazing is that it can come full circle? And I think that idea of diversifying our revenue streams and offering different services and making sure that we are well-rounded photographers, both on the like wedding and portrait side, like I just talked about, but also thinking a little bit about what are some other ways that we as photographers can use our skill set to grow our business. How can we use our skill set to earn revenue in maybe unconventional ways that we haven't thought about before? I'll give you an example of that. Wedding and portrait photographers, when the pandemic first hit, again, it was like no man's land. Like we couldn't do anything as wedding and portrait photographers. You couldn't be in front of clients. The only thing that was able to be running still is commercial photography. So I started thinking and I started asking photographers and started teaching these ideas of, why wouldn't you offer lifestyle sessions to your clients? Why wouldn't you offer product photography to your clients? Why wouldn't you offer recurring services to commercial and to businesses locally? What and what you can do as a photographer is far better than what they know and what they can do as a restaurant owner or as a greenhouse or as a winery or as a coffee shop. So why couldn't you help them in other ways, whether that be photographically, or maybe that means helping them get set up with live stream video services, or maybe it means helping them get set up with a social media strategy, or it helps them get set up with their Shopify store. Because what we know as photographers and the skill set that we have as photographers is a lot more varied than just being able to take pictures with a camera. We know about composition and lighting and exposure and direction, and we understand background choice, but we also understand social media and how to connect with people and how to plan out visual styles and how to build websites a lot more than the average business owner might. So I think by diversifying revenue streams, there's a few prongs there. It's how do you expand your existing photographic services to your clientele and to your market, but also how else can you help locally and get involved and think of new revenue streams that maybe you hadn't thought of before?
Well, it's interesting because you just hit on two more. Besides commercial, I want to throw out two more to our listeners now. JP Ilario is a wedding photographer around Albany. His dad, Joe, and I have been friends for years and years, and I've watched JP grow up in the business. JP has done easily $30,000 or more, and that was in the first quarter last year during what we'd normally refer to as slow season of what he called FaceTime portraits. So he would connect with his client. In fact, the local Albany news station picked up a clip of an interview with JP. So he'd get his client on one side, and they're on FaceTime. He's on his computer, and he's directing them with essentially how to pose for a headshot. He did some stunning engagement photographs, all while maintaining physical distancing, and staying under those health guidelines that were so important. And then the other one, I've been talking for the last 3 years about. It's a Bay Photo product, and this isn't meant to sound like an infomercial. Bay Photo is not a sponsor of this podcast, but they make a product called Performance EXT Metal. I've got a roughly 3 by 5 foot print outside on my pool deck. Remember, I live in Florida, so a lot of people have pools, and I've got this print of a sunset on the beach that's been outside for 3 years, and it's stunning. And it doesn't show, at least to the naked eye, it doesn't show any breakdown in fading. It's just as beautiful as the day I hung it up. Well, now take that product, and you mentioned restaurants before. You've got thousands of restaurants in this country that are now doing outdoor seating. And in most cases, it's along the side of their building. They weren't really set up to do outdoor seating, but they found a way. And yet they've got nothing that's decorating the area. So being able to go into a restaurant owner and do, maybe it's a shot of the staff, maybe it's diversifying your skill set so you know how to get some decent food shots. And that brings in a little bit of the close-up macro world, which goes back to diversifying your skill set during this downtime. But there's a whole client base out there that is dying for servicing, and they've all moved outside, and you're sitting against a concrete wall. So being able to have some prints either on the wall or on an easel, something that talks about that restaurant again, and it just adds to it. I mean, it's another part. It's more commercial, like the way you were going, than it is typical wedding and portraiture. But the fact that you're a photographer and you've got all those skills, they're still so valuable if you just think about how to be more diverse in your target audience.
So, Bryan, this is all really, really good information. And what's so cool is that you really have your finger on the pulse of so many photographers and where they're excelling and where they're struggling right now. And one really important thing that I really want to hit on, and you mentioned this as well in your list, is the importance of building relationships and guiding and serving your clients. I think it's really easy for a lot of us to kind of go, oh, there's a pandemic, I'll just wait until the pandemic is over before I reestablish contact with my clients and start booking shoots. But it's important we don't forget that there are things we can still be doing right now. So could you give us some tips about keeping the relationship alive with our client list and how we can guide and serve and help them?
Yeah, I think this is such an important one. And it's, again, one of those things where before the pandemic, this was important. During the pandemic, this is unbelievably crucial. And I think beyond the pandemic, this is going to be just a part of how we as entrepreneurs build our businesses. So let's kind of maybe back up into the mindset of, when we're in this space of, sharing these concerns and these challenges with each other as humankinds. I mean, we're all in the trenches together during this global pandemic. I think the importance of being human and the importance of building relationships and the importance of expressing empathy with each other cannot be emphasized enough. And I say that in the sense of, we don't necessarily want to go to a place where, we're complaining and being whiny on social media about our own circumstances and things like that. I don't think we don't want our clients to feel sorry for us. But I think at the same time, this is a time when we can be human. We can express and just say, hey, this has been hard, and a lot of businesses have pivoted. I've noticed yoga studios are offering online yoga. I've noticed doctors are offering virtual consults. I've noticed restaurants offering curbside pickup. Like, all these different businesses have pivoted. And so me as a photographer, I haven't been able to be in front of clients. I haven't been able to photograph you. I didn't get a chance to photograph your baby. I didn't get a chance to do this newborn session or to do this other, session that we had planned. So here's some ways that I'm thinking about pivoting, and here's some ways that I'm looking at keeping my doors open so I can continue to serve you and add value into your lives in the future. So, and go on to examples, whether it be like what Skip was talking about with, servicing with different kinds of products, or offering different kinds of services, or expanding, or offering the ability to past clients to purchase reprints or to purchase albums or books of sessions that they maybe hadn't done before. But just that approach of being human and being personable and being transparent and open without showing too many of your warts, but just being open and expressing that, I think is really important. And I think the other side of that is this importance of remembering that it's not about you as a photographer. And I think that's it's such a hard truth to come to. We as photographers want to have and hold this space where, we are the artist and we are the creative, and it's our clients, honor and privilege to work with us, as photographers. And I mean, certainly I suppose if and when you reach, fame, where you're this, highly sought after and awarded and established photographer, perhaps there is a very small element of that. But I'd argue even still, it's important for you as a photographer to be shifting your business priorities and your communication style and your relationships to be about other people. And that means making your clients the center of the entire story that you tell and the entire experience that you create and provide. But also when it comes to what we talked about earlier with diversifying revenue, how do you break out of, looking for the next job for you, but instead how do you start looking at how you can serve others? And that change in perspective, this change in perspective of flipping the lens around and focusing on our clients as opposed to focusing on us. When you serve others and you make your business about serving others, the opportunities are going to be fruitful for you, and your impact and the value that you can create for folks is going to increase exponentially. And I think that small shift, again, is something that was important pre-pandemic, but I think that post-pandemic, it's a non-negotiable. It's something that we have to really be thinking a lot about, incorporating that into our businesses.
Well, you just took me into another direction again, which is right on top of what you just said. But in terms of making the client the focus, I don't think it's ever been more important for people to be involved in their community, because there isn't. Every nonprofit in your community has the same challenge in that they're limited in events. If there was a walkathon scheduled, it may be happening now with social distancing or physical distancing, as Bob Coates likes to say, because there's nothing about, you don't have to not be social. It's just the physical distancing.
I love it.
But there's so many events that have been postponed. Well, using your blog, for example, to do a community calendar of events. One of the nonprofits here in Sarasota that I'm involved with and on their board and love it dearly. I mean, it's a $16 million nonprofit that's done, 250,000 Meals on Wheels last year and support to the senior community. But they couldn't do their big gala event. So they did an online event. Well, being there to help with that online event is another piece of it. Being able to use your skill set, not necessarily your camera, but your understanding of social media as a photographer, being able to help a nonprofit build a better looking blog or website. That's another service to others that falls in there. And for years, I've quoted J. Conrad Levinson, the father of guerrilla marketing, who talked about people like buying products from companies they perceive as giving back. So whether it's an actual product or the services you offered, you want to be right out there, helping out in your community and finding ways that you can focus more on not just your customers, but your overall target audience.
Yeah, I think that's so important, of just, thinking of others and how you can serve others, because that's where you can come up with ways that you can add value in a way that folks would part with their money for. I mean, it's like, it sounds silly, but it's like, if you want to solve a problem, go and look for the problem and then come up with a solution for that problem. I mean, that's how businesses are built. Yet a lot of the times we seem to be holding a solution in search of a problem, and it needs to come around full circle, in my opinion, to focus on others and find out how we can help them and how we can serve them. And then even like very tactically, the way that we communicate and the way that we talk. I mean, I've done hundreds of website teardowns, and especially during, the first aid course and the first aid program we put together. And during, the pandemic, I've been doing this a lot for other photographers, where I say, let's go and work on your site. And this is one of the cornerstones that I would give feedback on, as I say, if you do, a scan through your site, if you say the word you, like as in like me, I, more than you say the word you, like talking to the person reading your website, you're doing something wrong, because that means that you're talking more about yourself as the photographer than you are about the person who's there on your website trying to learn about how you can help them. So just simple things tactically from a I guess we'll call it from a selling perspective, from a communications perspective, from a marketing perspective, the more that we can talk about the people that we're trying to serve, the better off we'll be in being able to communicate clearly to them and show them how we can give them a benefit in their life.
Well, you made a comment before about, social media and being human. It's really important right now to be relatable. And for your audience out there, whether it's through your blog, your website, and I've repeatedly said this over the years, your website is about what you sell, your blog is about what's in your heart, and they both work together. So being able to be relatable, there's no problem to me with anybody expressing their frustration over the pandemic. But if you do it in a way that says, hey, everybody, here's something we're doing that we wouldn't have thought about had it not been for the pandemic. And I'll give you an example. Stephen Goetz up in Northern California came up with an idea of taking portrait images, throwing it into Photoshop, pulling the color, turning it into line art, and sending it back to clients with small children as coloring book pages. Well, it's brilliant.
Love it.
It's the perfect way for goodwill and to focus on your customer, while at the same time being able to talk about that in a blog post, for example, because it came about because of the pandemic, because moms and dads were stuck at home with small children, and you can relate to this one. With 3 kids under the age of 10, you definitely can relate to this. It was just a great way to service and focus on the client. And again, it brings in the photographer's skill set. And whether it's family portraits turned into coloring book pages, or last year's vacation, or a trip to the zoo for that matter, but giving families and kids the content that's going to help take one day of the pandemic, because all we can do is do this one day at a time, and just make it go a little bit faster and easier.
Bryan, I have like a page of notes sitting here in front of me. And I mean, because these are all just great actionable tips. And I wish we could talk for hours and hours, because I feel like the 3 of us could. And it would all be awesome, valuable information. But we're coming towards the end of our interview. And I do want to get in our favorite final question. Skip, how does that sound? Unless there was anything you wanted to jump in with.
No, I think the reality is that we ought to look at scheduling part 2.
Right?
Because Bryan, there's so much bouncing around in your head and dealing with that. And it comes with the fact that you've got so much content with so many photographers on the front line through SproutStudio. And that's where it all comes out. So you're kind of out there as practicing, you practice what you preach, you walk the talk. And I think we ought to skip, we'll look at doing a part 2. But in the meantime, we got to wrap it up, and you've got the favorite question right there, Shamara.
So, Bryan, and I feel like our whole interview kind of covered this, but if there's anything you want to add, what advice do you have for photographers who are just starting out right now, given these unique times, what should they be doing?
So I love this. I think a lot of what I'd be like, just rewind and listen to the last 30 minutes. That would be my let's do it again. But no, I think more specifically and maybe more succinctly, the importance of this box that we define for ourselves. You say I'm going to be a wedding photographer, and here's the confinements, or here's the boundaries of what that looks like, or I'm going to be this photographer, or I want to do IPS, or I want to do this, or I hear about this thing that people keep talking about. We create these boxes that sort of contain all the details and all the expectations of what this thing is. And then we, nicely place ourselves in the box and look to make the box pretty and so on and so forth. I think my advice would be, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that like the box doesn't exist. Let's put a stick of dynamite in the box and blow it up, and then like see how you deal with a bunch of pieces of cardboard on the ground. That's kind of what we've been dealt in 2020. And I don't say that to be pessimistic. I say that to be realistic in the sense that like that's the journey of entrepreneurship. That's the path that we choose by running a business for ourselves. And so number one, thinking about what we do as business people, not necessarily as creatives. Again, going back all the way to where I starting as an entrepreneur first and a photographer second. Obviously, it's probably too late to advise that if someone's already a photographer, but let's put some importance in some, I guess, time and effort and energy into that business side of photography. And then while doing so, let's not make any assumptions about what anything means, and be okay to be flexible and to work with things. And that then goes to what we just talked about, which is like differentiate and diversifying revenue streams and, hardening your systems and so on and so forth. It's just, take this box that you think that you might have, and let's kind of open it up. At least let's give it a sunroof so we can see outside of the box and realize that, maybe there's opportunities that we're missing by focusing too much inside of that box.
Perfect advice.
Well, I got to wrap this up with one last reference to the box idea. There's a great line I quoted a while back. It's don't think outside the box, think like there is no box.
Love it.
That's even better.
Have you ever seen, just as a side note, maybe you guys can share this in the show notes or something, but there's that Venn diagram, or not a Venn diagram, it's like a circle, right? And it's like your comfort zone. And then there's like a dot outside of the circle that says where the magic happens, basically saying like magic happens outside of your comfort zone. And I think that like, again, that's a perfect, bring back to this box analogy. And what 2020 has taught us is we got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Love it. Absolutely. That is the perfect way to wrap this interview up. And Bryan, I want to make sure and ask, where can folks find out more about you and SproutStudio online?
Yeah, thank you. So, if folks want to come on over to Get SproutStudio, they learn more about Sprout, but we also have an entire ecosystem of education, including courses and calculators and articles and podcasts over there. So there's a whole space they can dive into there. Otherwise, come on over onto Instagram if you want to connect over there. It's just Get SproutStudio. Or I'm also on Clubhouse. I've been really active on Clubhouse, and would love to connect over there as well if anyone's on Clubhouse.
We will absolutely make sure to include those in the show notes, Bryan. Thank you. And Skip, where can folks find you online?
It's always the same answer. Everything I write is at skipcohenuniversity.com. My email is skip@mei500.com, or better yet, since Platypod is a sponsor here, use skip@platypod.com. And I'm Skip Cohen on Twitter and Skip Cohen on Facebook. And we are always looking for feedback on how we can make these podcasts better. So write to us. And as I always ask, Shamira, where are they going to go over to find you?
Yes, they can send me an email at shamira@photofocus.com. That is my first name, CHAMIRA@photofocus.com. We love getting questions, ideas, and feedback because it shapes how we move forward with this show. And we're all in this together. And it is always so exciting to have amazing guests on the show, like you, Bryan. Bryan, this was just awesome. We want to thank you for just chatting with us.
Hey, thank you guys for having
Just
me.
good stuff.
It wasn't that scary to be on this side of the microphone, I suppose.
We're glad that we made it painless for you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And we want to thank our listeners for joining us as well. Please tell your friends about this podcast, especially if they have the burning desire to improve their photography business in 2021 and beyond. So we look forward to having you all with us next time on Beyond Technique, brought to you by Platypod, Photofocus, and Skip Cohen University.